Have you ever noticed that when we are short-sighted with things, we tend to get discouraged? Like, I've got daughters, and I love my daughters. And she's like, great, you're using me as an illustration. Abby's going to turn 22. She's technically an adult. And sometimes, we look at her and we think, well, when I was 22, I would do this. Well, when I was 22, I was already married for 3 years. Abby's not married for 3 years, thankfully. Love you, Abby. But, sometimes we look at our kids and we think, well, why aren't they where we were when we were there? And why aren't they doing what we did? And it kind of tends to get us like, I'm not necessarily frustration, but anxious, like, okay, are they going to, what's going to happen? Are they going to move out? Are they going to, and not that we want Abby to move out. We like Abby and Lexi living in our house. But, they are getting older, right? And sometimes you're like, man, what would a quiet house be like? You just wonder these things. And anyway, you're probably wondering, why is he saying that? Well, because when we look at the short view, all we can see is the here and now, and we just kind of tend to wonder, like, what's going to happen? But I believe that one of the things that God would like us to do is not so much live with this short view on life, but to have a longer view, where we can see beyond the things and say, okay, this is a season right now, and this is here, and I'm going to enjoy this, and the next season I'm going to enjoy that. But when we have that long view, we tend not to lose hope. We tend to be able to see things in light of eternity rather than in light of what is going on currently. And, I was thinking about some of the things that we say in our world. You've probably heard this. Follow your heart. What does that mean? Like, my heart is like in the middle of me. I can't you want me to pull it out and then follow it? Like, I'm going to die. What does it really mean to follow your heart? Or, trust your heart. How do I do that? How do I trust my heart? What does this mean? What does this look like? And then, so if you're me, you begin to ask these questions, and then I automatically go to this. When I have done those two things, when I followed my heart and I trusted my heart, what have the results been? You laugh because your results have been the same as mine. Not very good. I mean, think about it. Has anyone else done this only to get themselves in trouble? Usually my heart takes me to a buffet line. I'm just telling you, that's how it is. This morning, it took me to donut holes. I'm like, hey, they talked to me. My heart said, well, I got to answer because I'm being kind and loving to the donut holes that are there. I'm loving my neighbor, which is the donut hole. Anyway, gets me in trouble. You see, just because it has a catchy ring to it doesn't mean it's correct. We come up with all kinds of jingles, and you probably know some of them. You deserve a break today. Burger King. Eat fresh. Subway. Have you noticed a theme here? I can tell you all the food jingles. Don't ask me a diet jingle. I don't know those. Have no clue anything about those. But just because it has a catchy ring doesn't mean it's correct. So follow your heart. It may sound good, but does that mean it's right? You see, we got to look at it another way. Just because it's a catchy phrase or a catchy jingle, we need to remember it's just another Super Bowl ad. It's somebody spending millions of dollars to exploit you. That's what it is. And people spend all kinds of money to get you to buy their product, not because they care about you, not because they want you to have it your way or that you could eat it fresh, but because they want your money. That's what it is. And I'm not a devil behind every bush, but I do believe that the devil does go to great lengths to get you to believe those jingles. He does. But what does God say about this? What does God say about our heart? In Jeremiah 17, 9 and 10, it says this, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart, test the mind, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruits of his doing. So Jeremiah says, here's what God says about our heart. It can't be trusted. So if I am to follow my heart, my conclusion should be this: it's not going to take me where I need to be. If I'm to trust my heart, I'm only going to be disappointed because what I am trusting in isn't what I need to trust in, or isn't going to supply what I'm hoping it'll supply. Now that's why I believe David wrote Psalm chapter 39. Because in Psalm 39, David shows us how we should respond to our heart by revealing to us his heart as he struggled with just life things. He struggled with the consequences of his sins. He struggled with temptations to follow his heart. And yet, that's what Psalm 39 is. It's to show us how David overcame that. And again, David's experiencing some hardships due to his circumstances. And this psalm shows us really four ways we could respond to our heart when facing difficult times. And what you're going to find is it's pretty simple, and I think you can all relate. And so in verses 1 through 3, what we're going to see is that when your heart is burning, we need to be silent. It says, to the chief musician, to Juditha, a psalm of David. And here's what David says: I said, I will guard my ways, lest I sin with my tongue. I will restrain my mouth with a muzzle. While the wicked are before me, I was mute with silence. I held my peace even from good, and my sorrow was stirred up. My heart was hot within me. While I was musing, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. And so here David expresses to us that his heart was burning. He was just frustrated, or it was just there was stuff going on that just made him hot. You ever been there? Ever been so frustrated that you just felt like you were burning up? What's interesting to me is how David starts this psalm with a proclamation. Notice what he said: I will guard my ways. That's interesting. He's going to guard his ways. How does he do that? By being silent. I thought that's so interesting. Now, the word guard here means this. It means to keep, observe, give heed to, or take watch over. And so David is saying this: I am going to take heed, observe, and keep watch over my mouth so that I do not sin. If you're like me, you could probably recall a time in your life when your heart was so hot that you opened your mouth and responded to the situation and you regretted it. Right? I wish that wasn't the case, but it happens far too often. There was one time, I'm going to use kid illustrations all day today because I can. I got so angry at Lexi. I was so mad, and I said some stuff, and I grabbed her phone. And not only did I say things, I chucked that phone against a brick wall. An iPhone, when you're 6 feet away from a wall, throwing it as hard as you can, it explodes. It's quite impressive. Wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done. Not only does she still remember it and hold that above my head, it cost me financially. I had to buy a new phone. Why? Because my heart was so hot and I said things and did things that I shouldn't have done. And it hurt the people that I cared the most about. David went as far as to say he restrained his mouth with a muzzle. I was going to go buy a muzzle and bring it up here. They're not cheap. So just picture I had a muzzle in my back pocket and I pulled it up. It's an invisible muzzle, right? But I put a muzzle over my mouth. So I started thinking about this. And I'm picturing in my mind David talking about putting a muzzle on his mouth. And I was sitting there and it just kind of put a smile on my face. Partly because what I began to do was wonder if the world wouldn't be different if we actually all carried muzzles in our back pockets. Probably not, but it still wouldn't hurt. But David also said it another way in Psalm 141 verses 3 and 4. He says this, he said, "Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the doors of my lips. Do not incline my heart to any evil thing, to practice wicked works with men who work iniquity, and do not let me eat of their delicacies." I was really good with that verse of God putting a watch, keeping a look over my mouth so that I wouldn't say anything, so I wouldn't. But then he had to put that last part. Do not let me eat of their delicacies. I was like, man. But I started thinking about, we oftentimes guard our mouth because we don't want things to come out of it. But what are we ingesting? What are we taking in? What are we getting a diet of? I mean, you remember that old phrase, garbage in, garbage out? And now, it's probably not even talking about food here, but for them, it was the company that he was taking, the people he was sitting with, the people that he was associating himself with. You see, David wants us to stop and be silent when our heart is burning. So our Proverbs 13:3, David's son has something to say about this. And I'm just picturing Solomon sitting back thinking, all right, Dad, you've used me as an illustration for many times. I'm going to get back at you. And Solomon says this, "He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lips shall have destruction." You see, it's better to keep silent and be thoughtful than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. That's what Solomon says. You see, then David mentions that there was this fire that burned while he was silent. And I started thinking, okay, if there's a fire, what did it do? I had a bonfire here this week because it was going to rain on Wednesday, and I was like, I don't want that burn pile to get wet. So I'm like, on Tuesday, I'm out there with the fire. The priest's like, fire, fire, fire. I'm like, yes, bigger, bigger, bigger. No, but I was loving it. I'm burning it, and it gets done. And there's just something about a fire that is so refreshing. It does so much. It's awesome. That's all I can say. Because when it's all said and done, everything that was that eyesore, that was that waste is burned up and no longer there. And there's something so satisfying. And so I started asking myself, what is the fire that God wants to bring into my life to do things, to produce this purity, really, in me? And I thought about Isaiah 6, verses 1 through 10, where it says this is what it says. It says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on the throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory.' And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So I said, 'Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips. And I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts.' Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth with it, and said, 'Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sins purged.' Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?' Then I said, 'Here I am, send me.' And he said, 'Go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, that their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and return and be healed.'" You see, when we feel like following or listening to our heart, or we feel this burning within us that's almost demanding us to speak, it's really important that we become intentionally silent. And I think back to that passage that we just read in Isaiah, where Isaiah just felt undone. He's like, I live in this world where it's unclean and I'm unclean lips. And what do we do? And yet God shows up and dealt with it. How? By taking coal from the fire and touching his lips. You see, what happens, I believe, when we take time to be silent, we give God the opportunity to take the coal from the fire of the altar and touch our lips so that the words that come out of our lips are coming from a pure heart, because God takes that coal from the fire of the altar to purify our lives and give us an opportunity to speak redemptive words. Because it was after that angel took that coal on his lips and touched it that he said, now go and tell. And think about it. If when our heart is burning, if we just took a moment and be silent and didn't say anything until God said, now go and tell, how much more different would this world be? Because the words that would come out of our mouth would bring life and bring hope. The second thing that we're going to see is that when our heart is burdened, we need to be honest. In verses 4-6, it says, Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am. Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my age is as nothing before you. Certainly every man has his best state is but a vapor. Selah. Surely every man walks about like a shadow. Surely they busy themselves in vain. He heaps up riches and does not know who will gather them. And so when David took this time to be silent, what did it do? It gave him the opportunity to self-reflect and look at himself honestly. Not just himself, but the situation that he found himself in. And what did David recognize at this moment? David recognized that his life was short. Now, some of us understand that. Some of us still feel we're invincible. Some of us are somewhere in the middle. I'm at that point now where when I wake up, I'm just grateful when it doesn't hurt. And I say it because I don't even know what it is anymore. Like, I thought I knew my body, and I thought I knew what muscles were which, and I wake up things, I'm like, what is that? I didn't even know I had that. And it hurts. Right? But here, David is saying, take an honest look. Life is short. You see, David realized he wasn't what he once was, and he's not necessarily what he thought he was going to be. And then he reflects honestly and came to the realization that life is short. So if life is short, what do we need to do? We need to seize the opportunities God gives us to do what? To speak life and to love the people around us. But you know what? This wasn't a new thing for David. This wasn't something that David just woke up one morning and like, oh yeah, this is new. If you go back to the beginning of his life, in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 1-3, when he was already kind of named king, but he wasn't king yet because Saul was still king, but Saul didn't like him. And he had his buddy Jonathan, who just happened to be Saul's son. And David's running from Saul to save his life. Here's the conversation that he has with Jonathan. It says, then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and went and said to Jonathan, what have I done? What is my iniquity and what is my sin before your father who seeks my life? So Jonathan said to him, by no means you shall not die. Indeed, my father will do nothing, either great or small, without first telling me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? Is it not so? Then David took an oath again and said, your father certainly knows that I have found favor in your eyes. And he has said, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. A young David lived his life with the reality of this. Life is short. And if life is short, then we need to seize the opportunities that God gives us. And we need to be honest. We need to be honest with ourselves and say, you know what, life is frail. It's not necessarily everything I thought it was going to be, but it's so much more at the same time. But you know what else he understood? Was that life is just a number. Age is just a number. Age is just a number. And it's really nothing before God. God's not like, oh, well, you're young. Oh, you can't do anything. Oh, you're old. Well, you're too, whatever. And no, it's just a number. And what's fascinating to me is as he talks about age is nothing before you, and even though it's like a vapor that's passing, he then says Selah, meaning to pause. He wants us to pause and consider this truth that God looks at our age and doesn't say, well, I can only use you if you're in this brackets. If you're too young, no. If you're right here, yes. And if you're too old, no. You see, part of the problem in the church today is this. We tell kids that, oh, they're the church of tomorrow. And then the older generation is like, well, it's now their turn to do it. And then the middle generation is like, what do I do? How do I do this? And the truth of the matter is this. The church today is 0 to 100. That's the church. So why wait for the kids to do what they should be doing in the church today until they're older and then sit back and wondering why when they get older they leave the church? Well, because we've told them all their lives that they don't belong until they're a certain age. And then why is it that we wait and then we've, to the older generation that has put in their time, we're like, well, you could take your vacation now. You can retire. You've done your job, now leave it to the young bucks. No, we need everybody. The church is 0 to 100. And if we wait until tomorrow, if we think it's too late today, we're in trouble. But if we live in this reality where age is a number that God doesn't really care about, but that God has everybody here for a reason, and everybody has a place and a plan in God's family called the church, man, what do you think it would look like? What difference do you think that could make? When you watch these little kids going up to, the older generation and are just in awe of them, and they can't wait to tell them their stories and sit on their laps and be hugged. To be a part of what God's doing. For the middle group to be like, man, I've made my mistakes, and going to the older people. I'm like, hey, can you speak this? Or if today it's like this, it's like some of you guys, like, if it wasn't for your grandkids, you wouldn't even know how to use your phone. And I thought I was like advanced in technology. That was 10 years ago. Now I'm an idiot. I could turn it on. I know now that I can go to YouTube and figure anything out. But man, we're all in this together. Verse 6 reminds us that so many people are moving but not really going anywhere. Have you ever noticed that? Surely every man walks about like a shadow. Why is that? I think it's because what Solomon tells us in Proverbs 29:18. Where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keeps the law, happy is he. People wander because they don't know where they're going. They don't know how to get where they're going. Habakkuk 2:2 tells us this. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. People just need to know where north is. So what's our vision? Like if I ever say, what's the vision of Refuge? It's simple. Let's make Jesus famous. Everything we do, that's for his fame, his glory, not ours. So when we give out Thanksgiving baskets, it's not so people can say, oh, Refuge is such a generous church and we love them. No. Jesus loves you. He's pursuing you. He uses his people in the church 0 to 100 to show you that love, who've gotten behind the vision of making Jesus famous. And we do that practically by giving out food. Or walking with somebody when they're struggling, or calling them up, or sending a card, or holding babies in the nursery, or realizing that until I breathe my last, God's not done using me. There's still a ton of work to be done. So when our hearts are burdened by what's going on around us, be honest with ourselves. God, this is just a vapor. I've only got a certain amount of time. Help me to be faithful. Ask God for clarification on how you fit into what he's doing in the world. God, I thought I knew. But like David, I was once young, now I'm old. So now where do I fit in? How do we keep going? What are you doing? How can I join you? And this will ensure that you won't lose heart, regardless of your age. We shouldn't give up. We shouldn't give in. We should look up and we should trust. God, what are you doing and how can I join you? One of my prayers Sunday morning is this: Lord, send fire from heaven and consume anything that has my fingerprints on it and leave only that which has yours. And God, how can I join you in what you're doing in your church and in this community and in this world? You see, when we take the long view of things, what we see is God is always working. The next thing in verse 7 that David shows us is that when your heart is believing, be patient. That's a tough one, I know. And he says, and now, Lord, what do I wait for? My hope is in you. It's interesting to me that this is the central verse of this psalm, but it's also, I believe, the turning point in David's experience. David realized that God was doing stuff. He put his hope in God, but the problem was sometimes when we hope that God would work, we get impatient. Have you ever had that? Like, God, I want you to work. I believe that you can work. I hope that you're working still today, but can you please do it on my timeline? And if you're like me, your timeline and God's timeline somehow don't line up. But we got to be patient in those times, even when we're believing. You see, David asks a great question after his honest plea. He says, his life is short and goes past so fast. What am I waiting for? The word wait here means this. It means to look for, hope, or expect. What do I look for, hope for, and what am I expecting you for, God? And that's going to be different for everybody. And I have my lists. And those lists change. But there's certain things on that list that aren't changing fast enough. And I have to say, God, Lord, give me patience. Let me see the long view of this. David's concern wasn't how long he was going to live, but how he was to live while he was alive. And that's what we need to do. As we're patient and we ask that question, we're saying, God, I don't know when the end is going to be, but how can I live with hope and faithfully trusting you with my life while I'm still alive? You see, at this time of David's life, his heart was heavy and burdened. And so would the hearts of the exiles be because of their sins. And maybe you can relate to that today. You have a heavy heart and you're burdened, you're waiting, and you think you're waiting patiently, but you find yourself getting impatient, wondering when God's going to intervene in whatever situation you're trusting him with. You see, David, in this time of his life, there was still a part of him and those that were exiles hoping that the Lord was not abandoning or done with them, meaning that they thought that maybe God was because things weren't going the way they thought they should. But when we live with a long view of hope and God's faithfulness, regardless of the length of our days, we can have this hope and this assurance that even if we if we don't live long enough to see what we're hoping for, that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. You see, God doesn't quit just because we breathe our last. You see, it's the same God that the exiles hoped in, that David hoped in, which we hope in. And he never changes. A life measured by our accomplishments rather than eternity, it's a life that loses hope. But God, I did all this stuff. Why aren't you doing? When a life that says, God, I'm going to live trusting you, it says, it doesn't matter what I've done. God, give me the patience I need to see the long view of what you're doing. It's a short-sighted life that hopes in the temporal, not the eternal. Are you living with eternity in view or tomorrow? How you view eternity impacts how you live today. In 1 John 2:17, it says, he who does the will of God abides forever. You see, David's faith in the Lord moved him from hopelessness to hope, and from the state of being paralyzed to a state of action. And a life that hopes in the Lord is a life that, regardless of what's going on around you, says, I will trust the Lord to be with me. It will stir up something within you, kind of like Paul told Timothy to do in 2 Timothy 1:6-7, where he says, therefore, I remind you to stir up the gifts of God which are in you through the laying on of hands. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. So when we stir up what God's put in us, it does something to us. It gives us the patience to wait for the Lord to do the work in light of eternity, not in light of tomorrow. Allowing you to wake up each morning with hope because God's mercies are new every morning. And then the last thing that we're going to see is when your heart is broken, repent. Usually that brokenness shows us something about us. And David said this, deliver me from my transgressions. Do not make me the reproach of the foolish. I was mute. I did not open my mouth because it was you who did it. You see, we've begun by looking at David being silent because of his sins, and he asked for forgiveness in verses 8 and 9. When I read that, I started thinking, it's amazing what God can do with a closed mouth. You see, with his mouth closed, he saw his sins and he admitted his guilt. We don't know what David's sins were. We would like to. Why? Because we'd like to say, well, at least I didn't do what David did. But God didn't give them to us. Why? Because it's not about David's sins. It's about us being honest, looking at our life and saying, God, are there any things in my life that have caused this broken heart that I need to repent of? If God wanted us to know what David did, he would have told us, but he didn't. What we do know is this: God listens to the cry of the brokenhearted and forgives those who confess. We know that. We can hold on to that. And then next, David asks God to do what? Heal his body. Man, he says, remove your plague from me. I am consumed by the blow of your hand. When with rebukes you correct man for iniquity, you make his beauty melt away like a moth. Surely every man is a vapor, Selah. Hear my prayers, O Lord, and give ear to my cry, and do not be silent at my tears. For I'm a stranger with you, a sojourner, as all my fathers were. Remove your gaze from me, that I might regain strength before I go away and am no more. And that's how David ended it. Here David is crying. Broken heart that produced tears. Have you ever had things in your life that broke your heart so deeply that you didn't know what to say, but that the only thing that happened is you found yourself just crying? I want you to know this, and I believe this is what God wants you to know this. Your tears are never wasted. God sees them, and he hears them. Your tears are a gift from God, a gift that God uses when you don't know and don't have the words to speak. Alexander McLaren said this. He says, his prayer swells into crying, and that again melts into tears, which go straight to the great Father's heart. Weeping eyes are never turned to heaven in vain. The gates of mercy open wide when the hot drops touches them. David longed for healing of sickness. He longed for deliverance from God's hand of discipline and the rebuke that cut deep to his heart. And guys, you know what? Those are all things we experience. But know this, how we look at them makes all the difference in the world. We will be discouraged if we only look at them through the lens of the here and now. We won't be able to see through the tears. But C.S. Lewis said this, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our soul, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to arouse a deaf world. God speaks in those times of hurting, in the mourning and grief. And when we look at those things through the lens of eternity, we have hope. It helps us to remember that as our bodies age and decay and eventually die, as the wealth that we gradually, that we put hope in gradually loses its value, like a moth silently destroying a garment. When we have that long view, we understand things. Jim Elliott said this, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. And so today, I want us to do what Psalm 46, 10 and 11 says. Again, this is David writing this. Listen to these words. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the heavens. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. When we take the long view of things, we can be still, we can be silent, we can be honest, we can be broken, we can let our tears flow, we can have faith. And as we look at our life through the lens of eternity, choosing to daily live a life that is silent, honest, patient, and repentant, we do so with the anticipation that one day we'll be with Jesus. But yet, even when we're gone, Jesus is still here working, because Jesus works for all of eternity, past, present, and future. And so, guys, I just want to encourage you today, don't lose hope. God is still working. God is still on the throne. We are still his children. And when your tears hit the ground, know that there's no wasted teardrop. God hears it. God catches it in his nail-pierced hand. And he draws close to you. So let's not lose heart. But let's say, God, what are you doing? How can I join you? How can I finish well? And how can I wake up every morning with the hope that God's mercies will be new and great is his faithfulness?